Good afternoon and greetings from North Queensland. My name is Veronica Williams and I'm going to be talking to you today about how I use Family Tree Maker filters to keep track of my DNA analysis. I've been using Family Tree Maker since about 2006 when I quickly realised that products like Ancestry don't give you enough flexibility to be able to search and filter in your tree the way you would like to. Thank you, Megan, for the great presentation this morning on how to use Family Tree Maker filters. It was very useful for all of us, I'm sure. Today I'm going to be talking about how I use Family Tree Maker filters to keep track of my DNA analysis. As most of you all know, I'm a fanatic DNA researcher, and so my tree is ever expanding and I need to be able to use tools such as filters to be able to easily navigate around my tree. I'm not going to be explaining the mechanics of how to create filters in any depth, but I will be referring to how I use those tools. Many of you will know that I have a DNA blog called Genemonkey Explains. In that blog I have been slowly building up some blog posts in relation to how I use Family Tree Maker and with my DNA analysis. And there's 3 parts to the series so far: images, filters and citations. In terms of images, I like to use images in my tree to be able to give me a quick visual about where we're up to, and there is a great list of about, I'm not sure how many there are there, about 10 or so different images that I do use for different scenarios. Now the link to the blog is on the top of the page there in the red writing, so please go there and have a look at those. And the second post there about filters is a supplement about what I'm talking today, so if you don't understand some things I've talked about, hopefully that blog post will help explain those. Plus Larry will be sending out the link to the filters blog post as part of the output of the session today. You can see on this slide 3 different examples of some things that are relevant in setting up your filters and using customized facts to get the information that you want. So as you can see in the index image on the left hand side there, under create and manage filters, my tree is about 17,000 odd people at the moment, and about only a third of them, around 6,000 something, are actually related to me. So the rest of them are all hanging branches or unconnected trees that are relevant to my research that I don't want to lose track of and I keep together in my tree. Now I sync this to Ancestry and also put my confirmed branches on WikiTree. So my research tree on Ancestry is not necessarily all confirmed, but the WikiTree tree is. And you can see there down the bottom in the red box there the filters, and this is where I set up my filters. As Megan said this morning, I find it easier to do it that way. In the middle there in the green box is some examples of the different filters that I have set up, and I'm going to talk to you today about how I do my confirmation table and some examples of filters that are useful for research. In the right hand side in the black box, and looking at specifically in that red box, are custom facts that I've created, and you need these to be able to filter on, and it takes a bit of work to finalise or standardise, I should say, the words you're going to use in these fields, because that's very important for getting the filter to work correctly. So I'll just run through today some examples of those. You might notice there I've got the Wiki ID as a custom fact. I add Wiki IDs to all my profiles in my tree so that I can use a filter later on once I've confirmed a branch to look at who's already on WikiTree and just add the ones who aren't, where that label is blank, and I find that quite useful. A number of you will have already seen this DNA confirmation table that I complete regularly. I first became aware of this from reading a blog by Roberta Estes back in 2012, and I've been updating it ever since, so that's a decade now. Basically, this is giving me some ideas about where I'm up to with my DNA research, and I use it up to fifth great grandparents, so 7 generations, and at the 7 generation level we have 254 ancestors. So this is to keep track of how I'm going with analysing and confirming that those are the correct ancestors I should have in my tree. FTM filters give me a lot of information for this table. When I first started creating the table, it used to take me about a day or two to actually compile it. I'd get all confused at what was confirmed and what wasn't confirmed. But FTM filters have sped that process up. And you can see there that basically what I'm looking at is looking at how, of those 254 ancestors, how many do I actually know? And for me, at the moment, it's 165, which is 64%, nearly 65% of my tree. Of course, this is not a DNA presentation, but I can't help but make a few points. So if you have one match to a distant cousin beyond third cousins, then this does not equal a DNA confirmation. You need to have matches beyond third cousins confirmed using triangulation and chromosome analysis, and even closer cousins where there's no paper trail. Matches that triangulate to an ancestral couple don't confirm both ancestors either. You need to have matches beyond those two individuals to be sure that both members of the ancestral couple are your actual genetic ancestors. Often you'll find that you'll have matches on the female side but not on the male side, which is a problem that I have with my ancestry for 2 of Mum's great-grandfathers. So to complete the DNA confirmation table, you need the following 5 sets of data. As I said earlier, the first one, total possible ancestors, is a static number, depending on how many generations you want to measure your success to. So for me, it's 254 out to 5th great-grandparents. So the next 4 points there, total identified ancestors, total direct ancestors confirmed to an individual or a shared couple, or DNA tentative ancestors, are all used gathering the information via a FTM filter. So in terms of the total identified ancestors, that's how complete your tree is. And if you recall, my tree was 165. Now, one thing I like to do in Family Tree Maker is to use the 8 available colours for my 8 sets of great-grandparents and their descendants, so I can see at a glance in the index all those people who are actually directly related to me. So that's something like 6,000 odd out of my 17,000 person tree. So the first step is to create smart filters for your ancestors. And whilst this first one I have is for all my ancestors and not actually as part of gathering the information for my confirmation tree, I think it's very useful to have a filter showing all your direct ancestors so you can just look at them at a glance in the index. And this filter's coming up with 425 for me. And But when you do the 7 ancestor filter, so I've called it there's 7 ancestors, and you can see in that green box with the grey, I've limited the ancestors to 7. I've had to take a few people out in my filter rules, you can see down the bottom in the orange square, to actually get the numbers to work right. And you'll find that if you haven't got spouses correctly assigned in Family Tree Maker, you might not get the right number the first time you do it, but once you work that out, so in this case I had to take out myself, had to take out my husband, plus I had a whole lot of profiles that were called end-of-line ancestors, and I had to take them out as well because they're not real people. They were just place cards for me to do further research. And I've realised since I've been working with filters that they can actually probably be replaced with a filter as well. So I've yet to do that, but works in progress. So the next step is to create custom facts. And you can see on the left-hand side, I have 3 custom facts that I create: DNA status, DNA confirmed, and research tree. And you can see some examples there on the left of the sorts of things I add into those custom facts. And the custom facts are needed to help us filter, so that you need to specify certain terms, and that can be a little bit tricky, as I mentioned, to start with, but once you've got them standardised, they'll work quite well for you. Now you can go to Edit, Manage Facts to create these, but I prefer to create them in the quick entry, what you call that, box, which is on the right hand side in the way I've got my Family Tree Maker set up. And down there at Customize View, you can add custom facts. So by adding custom facts here, they will appear on every profile. So they're always there as a reminder to fill those in. And you can see there that I have the wiki tree link there for Harriet Parker. She's a shared ancestor, so that means that she's got DNA matches coming to her. She's also a confirmed ancestor, which means that I have confirmed ancestors via DNA beyond her. And the research tree I've put down is Pace Parker, which is the line that is relevant there. But you can use these fields any way you like. So the next step is to create the custom facts, and as I mentioned before, I have 3 that I use for DNA status, DNA confirmed, and my research tree fact. So this is the first one, DNA status, and I've determined to have just 4 different entries on those, and as you can see some examples down the bottom with the red ticks. So for testers, I just notate tester and the company they tested with. Direct ancestors just have shared ancestors, so that's one of the 165 people, that's all, only those people. Indirect line, I put the shared ancestor surnames for anyone in between a DNA tester and my shared ancestor that I have a match with. And the last one is for all those people in underconnected trees, anyone who has come up as a potential shared ancestor where I have a group of triangulated matches or a cluster all going back to the same couple. I notate them with TG ancestor. The second custom fact that I create was the DNA confirmed one, and again I have 5 set comments that I put into that field. Confirmed ancestor, where I know the individual has been confirmed. Confirmed couple, when it's going back to that couple, shared ancestors. Tentative for ancestor and couple, in the same sort of way. And the most recent common ancestor identified, I use this for testers, where the tester I have found how we are connected. And you can see those examples down there in the green boxes. So the top 4 are limited to my direct line ancestors. Now the third custom fact is the research tree. And this really is just to give me some reminders about why particular people are in my tree. And I tend to use it for cluster analysis and also for triangulated groups. And you can see there my complicated naming convention for triangulated groups. And for clusters, I tend to notate them maternal cluster 1 or paternal cluster 1. And for people who are just, I'm researching for some reason or another, and it's, I can use a comment there, Fred Smith Research or Britons of Ireland Project or something like that. So it's really just to give me a reminder about why they are in my tree. And as you can see there in my triangulated group numbers and even in cluster numbers, if I know the ancestor where the segment has been inherited from, I use the unentafel number. So the 006 is my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, and 013 is mum's, her grandmother, Abigail Courtney. So I tend to use those so that they can be searched on if I put them in that research tree field. And one thing I should remind everyone about for all these custom facts is that they can all be made private by default at the fact property level there. You can see on the right in the red box that little tick down the bottom, private by default. Any fact can be made private by default, and you can set it there and it'll apply it to everybody. So it saves you having to remember whether to mark something private or not. So step number 3 in doing the confirmation table is to actually run the filters to give you the data to fill in your table. And you can see there the red ticks on the side are the 4 queries that I run to run the confirmation table. Now you'll have to select all facts and detail what you're looking for in that field. You can see there in the orange box. And for this particular filter, I'm using the confirmed ancestor filter by typing in confirmed ancestor in that value and clicking OK, and that gathers me and applying it in the edit filter, selecting the DNA confirmed ancestor down the bottom there. And then that's given me a result of 50 people. So that's 50 DNA ancestors that I have individually confirmed in my tree. And you can see them in the DNA confirmation table there, in where the red arrow is. There's the 50. So it's easily updated next time. If you had 48 last time, you can see exactly where they've come in and double check them. And the others are just filters run exactly the same way for the 7 generations, as I said before, for the confirmed couple and for your tentative ancestors. And tentative ancestors are those where you haven't got segment data or they're from ancestry DNA, and whilst they might be a genealogical relative, they may not be a genetic relative until you've actually done that additional work to confirm them. I also like to then put it in DNA Painter, the information from that confirmation table, which I think is much more visual and easier to see. And sort of you can see there that the confirmed to the individual are in the dark green, light green are the ancestral couple, orange is the tentative, and for those ancestors that I've already identified but not confirmed, they're in the colours, and I've tried to align those to the FTM colours that I use in Family Tree Maker. And of course the grey bits are people I haven't identified yet. I'm now going to just quickly talk about some of the filters that I use for research purposes, and you can see them in that green box on the left hand side. The first 2 with the red ticks are triangulated groups and clusters that I've identified for a large group who all go back to a specific ancestor. So for these groups I like to go back and research them. So I've created a filter so that I can look at all the Cassidy-Maguire group at the one time and then start my research from scratch from those particular people. Down the bottom are the ones I use for other reasons, and I'm going to go through the TG Ancestor one, which is where I've notated a particular ancestral couple being a common ancestor within one of those triangulated or cluster groups. So for example, for the Cassidy-Maguire group, the Cassidy-Maguire couple would be in my TG Ancestor filter. So you can see it there that I've set up the filter there using the DNA status fact and then the value of TG ancestor, and that will show me all the TG ancestors if I run that. And in the research tree field, you'll see there that I like to notate the triangulated group name. And for those where I know where the segment has been inherited from, I assign an unentitled group number. So 012 is Mum's grandfather, Edward Roberts, born 1869. And this particular one here is an example for a triangulated group is on chromosome 3. And I also use these unentitled numbers where I know which ancestor I'm connected to a particular DNA tester, even though I might not know how that's happening. If I know the segment came from a particular person, I would also note the unentitled number. So you can see there that both the segment on chromosome 3 and the segment on chromosome 6 are all coming from Edward Roberts. So I can also use another filter, and you'll see it on the left-hand side there with the orange dot, Research 012 Roberts Laundon. By typing in the 012 into that filter for research trees, I've then created that filter and for all the people who have that in that particular field, and that will bring up all the testers, all the TG ancestors, or anyone who I've allocated that number to in that field. And I like to give it a colour, the same as the grandparent groups that I have used throughout Family Tree Maker. So just beware that, if you identify a colour for a particular filter, make sure that it's not in conflict with other colour coding that you might have set up in your tree. I'll make them the same so they work together. Another smart filter, which is a reverse of the DNA confirmation table I've set up, is the DNA Unconfirmed Ancestors. So this filter gives me a list of all the people in that group of 165 identified ancestors who haven't been confirmed. So this is a place to go to start researching or looking at those particular ancestors and making sure they're correct. I sort it by date of birth, so I make sure that I look at the youngest ancestors first, because you need to have a solid base in your tree and confirm one generation at a time when you're doing your DNA research. Another one is, as I've mentioned earlier, the TG ancestor filter, and I like to look at this, sort it by surname. Sometimes when you're doing research, you'll think, oh yes, I've come across that name before. By running that filter, it's a quick way to get all those potential ancestors in one place, and you can quickly scan the list to see whether that name is relevant. The last one I wanted to have a look at was the DNA testers, and I've set up a filter for all the DNA testers, which is pretty simple. The DNA status actually equals tester, and you can see there that I have 776 DNA testers already in my family tree. To refine the list to identify those where we haven't been able to work out the connection, I can actually add another rule into my filter, and that is to filter out where the DNA confirmation description contains most recent common ancestor. So you can see there's 409 that I'm still working on. To refine the list for those who have been identified, similar thing, just filter in DNA confirmation description contains most recent common ancestor. Now that number's showing 367, so I know I've confirmed a lot more than, or I've identified a lot more than that, so I've either not added them to my tree or I haven't updated the table correctly yet. So you can see the DNA testers there with a coloured dot. The ones that will have those dots appearing are where you have actually connected them to one of your ancestral lines, and it'll show the colour of the dot that you've notated for that particular great-grandparent, or if their match has been classified into one of those groups based on a triangulated group or cluster. And remember that when you're looking in the full index view, TG ancestors will also appear if they're known from those triangulated groups or clusters. So that's all I wanted to share with you today. So thank you all for your attention. I hope you've got something out of the session and some ideas for using filter in your analysis. And I'll hand back to Larry now for any questions.